Hi, I'm Anthony Fantano from The Needle Drop, and you're listening to the Capsule podcast on liveinlimbo.com.
This is Capsule on liveinlimbo.com. My name is Sean Chin.
And I am Andreas. This is an adventure into music, film, and pop culture.
The Needle Drop is an influential YouTube channel with over 1,300 videos, 300,000 subscribers, and get this, over 52.5 million views. It consistently pumps out entertaining album reviews and is an ongoing discussion and analysis of the music industry.
Anthony Fantano, internet's busiest music nerd, has found time to talk to us at Capsule. And now it's time for an interview. Morning, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Glad for you to join us.
Yeah, we're perfectly fine here. And I think our connection with you came in a rather interesting way. Did you want to maybe explain how this happened?
Yeah, you guys sent me an email, like a lot of people do, asking for an interview. But I guess the interesting angle on your interview was that toward the very start of the interview, you guys were talking about some of the positive reception that the new Swans album had received, and famed frontman and main brain of Swans, Michael Giro or Gira, said in response to something that you had said about my review, he was just confirming, hey, is that the guy from YouTube? I actually talked about it on a video on like my vlog channel, which I just thought the whole thing was really funny, really surreal. And I listened to the rest of the conversation, and I saw that you guys had a decent following, and the audio quality sounded really good. It sounded like on a from somebody who's done podcasting for a long time, it sounded like on the technical side of things you guys had your shit together.
Oh,
so
thank you.
I wasn't going to be like running into some kind of like it wasn't going to totally be amateur hour if I agreed to take part in this interview. So I was like, all right, so let's, they were nice enough to send that audio clip to me that brightened my day. Let's pay it forward and be a cool guy.
All right. Well, yeah. You're a really down to earth person from that, because you are the busiest person in music and like the nerd world of music, and to be able to do this, that was awesome. So all the stars aligned here. And so the first thing I want to know, Michael Gira says he thinks that you're a barista during the day.
What do you do during the day?
What was your thought about that? And all the comments on Twitter were exploding too. What went through your mind there?
I mean, it's not too far off, because I mean, during the afternoon, not even during the afternoon, I mean, the Needle Drop for years has been my afternoon job. But my evening job used to be that I was a cook at an Italian restaurant, specifically pretty much cooking, and cutting pizzas.
Well, he wasn't too far off then.
No, not too far off. I mean, it was a food industry job that I was doing, and had done for 10 years. This is actually my first like part-time job that I had ever gotten, that I had sort of stayed there for for a full decade. I had started working there when I was 16 and ended up leaving when I was 26, when I was finally able to take the Needle Drop full time. And I did this job throughout high school, throughout college, and it's just it was a small family run pizza place, but one of the more popular pizza places in Connecticut. And at the time that I left, and they still are, over the years they had become, family at that point.
That's amazing, man. I think that's the story for most people trying to utilize social media right now, but hopefully we'll get there too. If you were a barista, though, what caffeine specialty would you be making?
I never enjoyed coffee.
Really?
So I'm not even there. You wouldn't even catch me dead in a Starbucks.
Oh my God. I think you'd enjoy a caramel macchiato though. Whatever that is.
I'm just like, if I'm ever at a place like that, it's like Dunkin' Donuts, and it's just to get a bagel.
Oh my God. Okay.
And that's it. and that's it.
Perfect. That sounds good. Now you said
I'm more of like a green tea kind of person, you know?
that's the way to go. That's the way to go. That's
Zen.
what I well.
Yes, I just keep it real zen.
Exactly. You said that the pizza place was pretty well known. Did a lot of people recognize you from Needle Drop while you were working there? Or
No, mostly because I mean it would happen like on a really like super rare occasion. But the reason why is because it's I wouldn't say there was much in the way of like overlapping clientele, you know. But through working over there in one of the more popular pizza places, I kind of had my own second like mini circle of celebrity because my younger brother actually used to work at a few pizza places as well, including the one that I worked at for a while. And I remember when he moved on to a few other places, if he ever got to talking about me, some people might say, "Oh, is he the really big guy that works at Rossini's?" Because people would be coming in all the time at this pizza place, and I was primarily like working the ovens, and we would on Fridays and Saturdays be running 6 full pizza ovens with 4 to 8 pizzas like in each oven, and I would have to like oversee all of them and make sure nothing was burning.
That's
Wow.
an awesome transition that you made there in industries. That's awesome.
yeah, absolutely. While you were tending to pizzas and all of that, and you had all this time to open your mind, did that help with thinking about albums, letting them settle for a little bit on how you felt? Or
No, if anything, it just kind of like gave me an opportunity to not think of the needle drop at all and just kind of like unplug from it, because much of the time, unless I was like, going out with friends or doing something else recreationally, I was just thinking about the needle drop all day, every day, and how to make it better or just be working on it.
right. But that's a good thing, then. You got a little bit of a break from it.
Oh,
each and every day.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But now that you're full time, do you find a way to take a break from it as well?
I mean, I'm about to go to the gym after this, so
There you go.
Yes,
I was
absolutely.
about to mention that too. See, since you consider yourself a nerd, you live a rather healthy lifestyle, I might say.
Yeah, I mean, is that not a nerdy thing, or
Not typically, but so just maybe tell us what your routine is and how you eat and stuff.
I think I've always sort of had. I I was listening to this interview podcast with UFC fighter Mac Danzig yesterday, and he said something that really resonated with me that I really identify with, and that is I rarely dabble in anything, which is also the case with me. And not only just music have I been obsessed with for a long time, but just eating, health, and exercise as well has been instilled in me from an early age as well, because I've been hitting weights since I've been like 13 or so. More strength training than bodybuilding or anything like that. And mostly because throughout the 80s competitively, my father used to power lift.
Wow.
And had owned several gyms since I was a baby up until the point when I was like 13 or 14 or so. I actually think he might have gotten rid of his last gym just as I was transitioning into high school. So like maybe like 12 or 13 or something. And around that age, that like 11, 12, 13 age, he had me in the gym benching, squatting, deadlifting, leg pressing, doing a load of different exercises. And that was something to do because when I was a kid, he would go out to the gym because he was working there because he owned it, and there wasn't anything else to do there other than exercise. It was either that or sit around and play video games or something. And there's only like so many times that you could play the same video game and it's interesting.
You'd be surprised who you talk to.
Yeah, I guess. And not to say that I wasn't that kind of person too, because I loved video games. I mean, I probably loved video games more than working out when I was that age. Because Lord knows I couldn't really concentrate on working out as much as I would have liked to. But there was a time after that when he closed that gym that, I didn't go to the gym anymore. I didn't have any like, real passion to get back into it or anything. But, and I was a really heavy set kid. Several years down the road, I just kind of got tired of being so heavy, and I just took it upon myself to, I think at age 16, I was 5'10" and 300 pounds or so. And, and on my father's side of the family, especially, a lot of Italians, a lot of heavy, big eaters. So I just, like I said, I just took it upon myself to just start eating differently and start eating a more low fat diet and, just exercising more regularly. And then when I got to the point where I had dropped like 130 pounds, and this is over the course of like a year and a half or so.
Wow.
I wanted to start getting back into the gym. I, would invite my dad to come down. He would come down, but, I realized how much over the years I had remembered just because of muscle memory, and after that, it sort of became a thing that, I was more passionate about and wanted to do on a regular basis because it was cathartic. It was relaxing. It was, a way to unplug several times a week.
Well, good for you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's amazing.
130 pounds in a year. That's crazy.
Nerds can be fit too, eh? Nerds can be fit. There is.
You're breaking all these stereotypes and all these molds. You don't drink coffee. You're fit. You eat right. It's lovely. You brought up your father, and that made me question because obviously his exercise has been a big influence on your life. What about his music collection? Did you get a lot of that from him as well?
No.
Oh man,
not even close.
Well, neither him or my mother. Neither had a music collection, really. Neither had records or CDs for me to dig into. Outside of like contemporary stuff, especially on my mother's end. My mother in the 90s was big into a lot of the female singer-songwriters who were gracing the radio around that time. She really liked Melissa Etheridge and Alanis Morissette and Jewel. And, I remember a lot of those tapes in the car. But she was, my parents never told me to pursue music. They never had like, we never had a conversation where they were like, hey, this is real music or anything like that. Or where they were trying to explain to me what music was or what music I should like, at least from what I can remember. Maybe they did that when I was 3 or something, but from the point where I was like 8, 9, 10, where I can remember my first experiences with popular music, I just kind of gravitated toward what I gravitated toward, most of which was just being played on the radio or MTV. And I guess the important thing was that I never felt stifled in terms of what I felt like I wanted to listen to, from the point where I really thought there were some good Green Day songs on the radio to like being 16, and that was like when Dookie came out, to a ton of years down the road and I'm in high school and like, hanging out with my dad and we're playing Mario Kart and I'm like playing Dead Kennedys on the stereo and, he couldn't give a shit, So, I never felt stifled as much as like my parents may not have liked something I was listening to at the time, sonically anyway. I never was told like, hey, you can't listen to that or,
well, that's good.
You
You're
can't listen
free
to this.
Listen to whatever you want then.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there was actually, I actually vividly remember my mother, and keep in mind, my parents had split up at a very early age for me. I remember a time when my mother had been dating somebody, and she had invited him over for dinner, and my mother had like this big stereo in the middle of the living room, and I remember I was playing a rap tape that I had on the stereo. This particular tape my mom thought was really cool too, and we would listen to it together. And It's just so funny to think about that. But I remember this guy that she had over. He was like, "What? You like this stuff? You let your son listen to this stuff? All those rappers, they're all criminals. They all kill people. They're all horrible people. How do you let your son listen to this stuff?" And it was actually really funny because I remember his kids were like far more misbehaved than me. And but like, they weren't allowed to listen to the raps.
Oh my God.
But I was
the raps. That's hilarious. Yeah.
So I mean, my parents were always really open to what I felt like listening to. I mean, obviously I was picking most of the stuff that I was listening to from just major broadcast, television and radio. So obviously there was nothing like, it wasn't like I brought my mom an anal cunt tape, Right. I was like, "Hey Ma, listen to this." Yeah. Or, like a Napalm Death tape or, anything like too extreme. It was like all radio music, but still I was never made to feel like I shouldn't be listening to a certain thing.
And you could definitely see that with your collection, because obviously you've praised groups like Death Grips and Swans, which are non-conventional, not even in the slightest. And that made me think a little bit, because obviously we have a lot of people being cornered when it comes to music. Like, as you said, you have what radio limits you to. You have parents shunning what you can listen to, what's appropriate, what isn't. Do you find that a lot of people with different music tastes have their tastes altered, and thus they can't really open up to these more experimental types of groups?
To be completely honest, I don't know what makes people not, able to open up to certain styles of music. I mean, most of the time I have to chalk it up to just it being a cultural thing, not that music can't transcend culture, but I think more often than not, people tend to enjoy or gravitate toward the style of music that they associate with whatever culture they perceive themselves to be kind of living in, whatever music they perceive to be reflecting the sort of values that they feel that they have, or that they feel are important. And, and to some people, there's music out there that they think either works against those values or doesn't reflect those values as strongly. I think partially it's that. I think partially it's aesthetic. I mean, the reason we gravitate toward different styles of music is because they have different aesthetics. And some people, they're just used to a certain kind of aesthetic and they just want to stick with that. It's really hard to say why certain people can't open up to certain things. I mean, some people, they're not as gratified auditorily as other people are. My father, for as much as he does like some music, I don't think he really and he admits himself, like, sometimes he has a hard time telling the difference between one song and another, or he can't, like, he doesn't have like a good melody recollection or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, some people, for me in particular, I've never really been a big literature person, outside of like a few different authors. I mean, I do like to read, but most of the time when I'm reading, it's like news stuff, in-depth magazine articles, political science books, or something informational.
Oh, yeah.
For whatever reason, when it comes to reading really dry, turgid, informational prose, and maybe this is like from all the political science classes that I've taken and have enjoyed because I minored in political science in college. I just breeze through that shit. But when it comes to like making up a story, I just feel like I trudge through it because I'm like simultaneously trying to imagine all of this in my head and sort of work through the words.
It's dry.
Whereas like I feel like I'm doing double time. I have to like read through this story and imagine it in my head visually, where I'm just like, ugh, it's just double work.
Absolutely.
Whereas like, and there are other people who I'm sure, do that more easily. And maybe if I had the time and the effort to put toward, sort of, jogging that side of my memory, I could get there. But there are just some people who aren't as stimulated by the details of music,
Exactly.
as they are visuals, you know, or as they are reading.
With that said, what album do you feel had the most significant impact on your musical taste today that you listened to while growing up? Like which album is a foundation cornerstone in what you listen to today?
I mean, I think one of the most life-changing collection of songs that I was ever handed just sort of came in the shape of a couple of mix CDs that a good friend of mine had made me. Who, you know, I still, his name is Derek. He's been in a video or two of mine. I used to do my college radio show with him. And, in high school, he, had turned me on to at that time that he met me, I think I was listening to a lot of nu metal and anything else I had been enjoying since I had been a kid, listening to MTV and like the radio and stuff like Green Day and Smashing Pumpkins and Offspring and Rage Against the Machine. I was like big into when I was like 12. But then, you know, from there, he's like, you know, don't you listen to anything like from the 60s or the 70s or like, you know, the 80s? And in my CD collection, you know, because we used to walk around with these dopey ass CD books.
Oh yeah.
You know, I was just like, no, you know, I don't know any of that shit, you know, outside of like stuff that my mom tells me that she grew up with because she grew up listening to the Beatles, but she sort of matured. She came of age in the 70s. So, you know, she vividly remembers the disco era. So, you know, she would talk about that and disco music in general. And, so, you know, the answer was no. And then he mixed me this CD of like, just nothing but classic rock and punk rock. And, it opened my eyes to some different, more obscure, more underground things and got me listening to like Misfits and Black Flag and Dead Kennedys and The Clash and the Sex Pistols. And, you know, at first I was like really, really, I guess I was really super hesitant. But then I remember there was like one particular Dead Kennedy song that really stuck out to me. And then from there I ended up enjoying like every song on the tape. And, you know, from there I started going to this local music shop and started you know, stopped going to, you know, like whatever the chain music store in the neighborhood was and started going to this like local record store where they had like, you know, these more obscure underground records and started buying, you know, Cramps records and Ramones records and Dead Kennedys records and Misfits records and so on and so forth.
Wow, that's pretty great then. So from an early age on, you got into this kind of really obscure at the time anyways, growing up when you're a kid, like Sex Pistols is like the weirdest stuff. Like who would listen to that when you're 12 or whatever, right?
No, I mean, like, well, that when I got into Sex Pistols, that was like 16. That was like 16, 17.
Okay.
My introduction to punk music was like late high school years. Because that's when I had met Derek. Like up until that point, it was mostly like radio stuff, you know, or whatever. Like it was radio stuff from rock to pop to hip hop, but mostly like during those first few years of high school, it was like whatever like nu metal stuff was making it onto the radio.
Yeah.
So you know, I was like listening to fucking Korn and Mudvayne and
Marilyn Manson said in one video.
Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie.
Yeah. Oh,
So, like,
that was go-to stuff for me as well.
Yeah, that was like early high school stuff. That was like first half of high school. Second half of high school was just like punk rock.
Even so, it's hard to find that kind of stuff in high school where people will be listening to older stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean it is. And you know, and I remember like a lot of friends thinking it was really fucking weird when I would try to like show it to them. Because there were definitely more kids in my high school that musically, if we're, if we're talking like, more obscure stuff, I mean, they were more into like the new metal stuff than they were punk rock stuff. It was either like new metal or like pop or hip hop. And beyond that, there wasn't much variation.
Yeah. And fast forward to today now. So far on your website, you've only given a perfect score to 2 albums. Death Grips, The Money Store in 2012, and this year, To Be Kind by Swans. Can you maybe tell us a little about how you go about scoring this, a little in depth behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, totally the score is just like a reflection of my enjoyment. And to me, a 10 is just my threshold, or what I perceive to be my threshold of enjoyment for that particular record. Normally, I mean, pretty much every time my enjoyment of the record is sort of calculated just using whether or not I enjoy each song individually. Obviously if there's 3, 4, 5 songs sitting in the track list, which, I'll mark them, I'll make a note, 3, 4, 5 songs on the record that I hate, I sort of mark that against it, and sort of work together like an average of all the tracks. But obviously, and Swans and Death Grips are examples. Those were records that sort of going down the track list, I thought every song was fantastic. And from there, I mean, obviously that's going to bring the record a positive review. But from there, I'll sort of look at what I think the entire album looks like as a whole, or if all the songs, play into a theme or a really strong, bold, new, exciting aesthetic, or, just a really interesting, unique personality or concept, or so on and so forth. And those 2 records were records to me that played into those characteristics, or, or lived up to those expectations, or scratched those itches.
Yeah. And so what do you think Michael Gira meant by misguided accolades?
I don't know. I mean, it could have been, partially, part of me thinks that, maybe he means accolades that I've received, but there wasn't really any direct reference to any awards or anything that I have gotten.
So maybe you can ask him that when you get to speak to him.
Well,
or he'll ask that to you.
I was thinking he either meant that, or maybe he meant accolades that I was giving out to records, and maybe he was just being modest about his own work. I don't know.
Yeah, it could have gone either way there.
Because he strikes me as someone, and I'm like this myself, and a lot of great musicians who I look up to are this way as well. You're never totally completely satisfied with what you do, and even if you are, it's only for a very short time, because you have to kind of be in that mindset where as well as something as you did was,
it can always be better.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't dwell over it, because then you might put yourself in a mindset where you'll always be obsessed with living up to that, artistic potential that you reached at that one time, and you have no idea how to get there again. And so, I mean, it could potentially loom over every project that you do into the future.
Exactly.
So there is that, and there's also it also makes it difficult to put yourself into other creative mindsets if you're always obsessed over the mindset that you were in at this one point in your career. Yeah. Because in order to make a great record 10 years from now, and I mean, we can look at Soundtracks for the Blind, or we can look at The Great Annihilator, or we can look at Greed, and see positive things in all those records, but obviously none, like The Great Annihilator, obviously when it was being made, was not obsessed over how great Greed was, you know. And when Soundtracks for the Blind, and that wasn't even like 10 years down the road, when Soundtracks for the Blind came out, that record obviously was not obsessed with how great The Great Annihilator was, and obviously, To Be Kind doesn't give a fuck about how great Soundtracks for the Blind was.
Or even this year, which was 2 years earlier, right?
I mean, I think To Be Kind has quite a bit in common with The Seer. I think it's obviously different enough to praise it as its own record. But I think stylistically, um, uh, as far as like song composition and the way the riffs are shaped and the production of the music, there's a lot in common. And not that, and not that there aren't records that Swans put out that don't sound, alike. I mean, their first 4 or 5 records have a lot in common,
Oh yeah.
especially their first 3. Obviously with Greed, you have like different instrumentation, like piano coming into the fold, but it's all very redundant. It's all very primal. It's all very thuddy. It's all very riff laden. It's all just like really, really just super, super like it's music that you would imagine Gorillaz would make if you handed them records. If you handed them instruments, it's just so primeval. But obviously 10 years down the road, even though Swan's progression in some ways might be incremental, they're very clearly open to just sort of changing things in such a way that from record to record, the change doesn't seem that great. But when you're talking about like a distance of, 10 or so years in between albums, like the change is, very much night and day.
Yeah. Now, having said that, a band that we've discussed is a band that you've helped catapult a little bit into the interwebs, I guess. Death Grips. I remember you saying with Government Plates that they weren't really progressing, and in fact, if anything, they kind of got stuck in this web of whatever they created before, like the same web that they tried to track everybody into, right? Like this.
I think with Government Plates. Government Plates is definitely progression in that it doesn't sound exactly, or it's not composed in the same way that No Love Deep Web was, and their previous 2 records as well, and their EP. But to me, the disappointment with Government Plates was that lyrically it wasn't as engaging, and compositionally there were just a lot of redundant songs that just felt like the same groove, the same thing just being repeated over and over and over and over. And not only that, but a lot of these songs were brief to the point where they just felt pretty inconsequential.
Right.
So, obviously at that point, Death Grip still had their own style and their own sound. But the songs didn't feel that detailed. They just felt really redundant, and they didn't feel quite as fleshed out. And that was my slight disappointment with the record overall.
You've heard the new one, right?
I have been listening to the new one, and I'm planning on working on a collaborative review with Mike Seatown of Dead End Hip Hop on it, where we're just gonna discuss the record, talk about our feelings on the record. I'm not gonna do a full sort of score album, a formal review until the second half of the LP comes out, which could be any time. Who the hell knows?
Right. That's what a lot of people online were wondering, especially on that part of the internet we won't really mention. 4chan. Anyways, yeah, so having said that, obviously a lot of people are following your reviews. You ask for suggestions, they're constantly saying, oh, this album, that album, and you reply a lot. You've actually replied to me before when I asked when the Converge review is coming up, I think. You're very vocal about that when stuff's coming out. You try to cater to a lot of suggestions. When you pen an album that a lot of people are looking forward to, what is that reception kind of like? Like, do you get like a lot of negative feedback? Or do you find a lot of people who disagree, but they respect how you voice your opinion?
It's a real mix. It's a total mix. These days, I don't have quite as much time to obsess over the reception of what a review might be. And that, that has been a good thing, and that has been a bad thing in the respect that, it's bad because sometimes I feel like I'm totally out of touch with how people think about, I feel about a record,
Right.
Like, for example, when I dropped my Swans review outside of Twitter, I didn't really expose myself to too much reception on how people thought about whether or not I liked that record. I didn't really expose myself to that reaction too much, just because I had taken so much time making that review and listening to that album to begin with. I didn't really have time to reflect on how people felt about my review. I just had to get right into the next thing that I was doing. But most of the time I do make time to sort of take that stuff in. But, sort of the good side of not being exposed to that sometimes is going into the review, I'm not fucking thinking of it and I don't give a shit.
Right.
Obviously what I'm doing is a very open and in the public thing, and is very, sort of my career is sort of made on people's trust in me and faith in me to sort of come out with a review, and to sort of expose myself to people hating on me all day, not implying that is the case on all my reviews. I mean, there are a lot of people who obviously find a lot of value in what I do, which is why they watch. But if I just expose myself to people hating me all day, then I mean, that's kind of the, what goes in comes out, sort of thing, garbage in, garbage out. If you just if you just expose yourself to hatred of yourself all day, or sort of what people think of you all day, I think sometimes you may put that in the forefront of your mind, whereas what you really should be doing is just concentrating on what the fuck you're supposed to be doing. Not that you shouldn't open yourself to criticism, because there are a lot of things that over the years have become staples of the channel that have come as a result of somebody writing a really impassioned comment or making a really great suggestion as to how I should go about presenting or fixing something. But just to merely eat up every single time somebody says, "Hey, Anthony, you suck," or "Hey, Anthony, you're great." Like, you can't just like sit there and partake in that all day. You just have to kind of concentrate on what everybody is actually there for. And that's kind of, what your opinion is, or if, and that's something every content creator has to do. You just have to kind of buckle down and just concentrate on what people are expecting of you, whether that be a new song or a new movie or a new photograph or a new drawing or so on and so forth.
I think you Andres, you've been exposed to that too from your art pop album review from Lady Gaga. You got like 100 hateful comments on our website.
Right. And I'm like Anthony Fantano over here. I am vocal about things that I like, regardless of how it'll be received. Like when you reviewed Skrillex and you gave it a positive rating, like over Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, that caused a lot of backlash that year, where people were going, "How dare you? This is a classic hip hop album. You don't know what you're talking about," kind of thing.
Well, it's not even like just the Kanye thing, but it was actually really funny when I did that Skrillex review, because I didn't even know Skrillex was supposed to be bad when I reviewed that record. I was completely oblivious to the fact that I guess there were like a lot of really annoying high school kids listening to Skrillex and were total bros, and there were snobby sort of, really nerdy glasses wearing music dorks in high school who hated them. They're like, "Ah, the stupid idiots, they like Skrillex." Yeah. So like when I reviewed Skrillex, I got a ton of fucking people just saying, and this was before the Kanye review, even just the Skrillex review on its own, there were a lot of people who were like, "That's shitty electronic music. That's fucking music for bros." And I was like, I don't know who the fuck listens to this music. All I know is I listened to it and I thought it was all right. I thought Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites was a fun EP. I didn't know what the hell. I didn't know there was like some kind of subculture of people, or a culture of people I should be like hating who enjoy this music as well. I just like thought it was fun, jittery, colorful, heavy electronic music.
Yeah, absolutely. What I was referring to before was when you did your end of the year list and Skrillex made it on, and Dark Twisted Fantasy didn't. And I just remember all those comments where people would just, yeah, I've been watching that long. I just remember all these comments where people were losing their minds. And yeah, as Sean was saying, like you can't lie about liking an album if you really like it. And to be frank, I liked the new Lady Gaga. Sue me, I guess, right? So I read a review and I get the most feedback I've ever gotten, but it's all negative, and it's all what you were saying. It's not just, "Oh, you're an idiot for thinking this." There's all of this like pseudo political stuff too, where it's like, "Oh, only this kind of people listen to this music." If you don't know anything about music, how do you have a degree in art, this and that? Um, yeah, so I understand how that is. Obviously, not nearly as big of a level as you have, I guess, right?
I mean, to be completely honest, like when I did that Skrillex review, like yeah, there was a negative backlash, but it wasn't really like a huge negative backlash in that there were hundreds of people telling me to go fuck myself or anything like that, but it was big to me because it was like, it was I was still new to this whole thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
When I did my beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy review and I was getting tons of negative comments on that, that was like still significant to me, even though today that's probably not as much hate as I've gotten on some of my reviews.
Right.
But it was like big to me at the time because it was one of the first times that that I had gotten that much of a negative reaction.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so one last question for you.
I've got one afterwards as
Oh,
well. but
okay.
keep going.
We'll keep this brief. And what's your typical workflow? Like when you get an album, how do you review it? Is it usually like a physical record or a downloaded one or a streamed one? And then what kind of headphones you use, if you use any, or how do you
most of the
review it?
time I'm just listening on my hi-fi stereo through my receiver, and it's digital. I actually prefer things to be that way, mostly because it's less cumbersome. I mean, if I'm gonna have a physical copy of an album, I'd much rather it be because I like it.
Yeah.
I actually find the process of listening to the digital album a bit more simpler, more straightforward, and easier to just come out with the opinion that you have. If you just get the physical record, especially for somebody who's at my level of popularity, I'm not like Rolling Stone or Spin, where I'm sure for years, like, the physical album is what you expect. Like if you're really not going to give me the physical record, like, fuck you, who do you think we are? We're Rolling Stone. Whereas with me, I'm not at like the level where that like Spin was in the 90s. It's not like for me to even listen to your record, I'm like doing you the biggest fucking favor on the planet.
Right.
So and also because I sort of value the time and value the effort of the independent musician. I'm less likely to be swayed by the fact that oh, you sent me this record, like you're spending your own personal money here trying to get this CD to me, or I'm also like less likely to be swung over by like really elaborate or cool packaging or something like that. When I'm listening to the digital album, it's just really about the music and that's it. Like it's no BS. It's about as like just into the musical experience as you can get sometimes. If you're just looking for the sound, then bam, the sound is right there.
Absolutely. One last quick question, because you've given us a really big outlook into how you review, what you look at. I just had one last question because as a critic myself, I get this all the time where it's not directed at me, but I'm sure you've seen this as well, where other people will go on, like Rolling Stone, for instance, as you were saying, and they'll say, what's the point of a critic? They don't know what they're talking about, this and that. Like, and it's just because they simply disagree with them. Now, I find myself disagreeing with a lot of your reviews, but I love your insight and I love how you pick it apart because it makes me either appreciate why I like it more or it makes me look at it from a different perspective. So having said that, for my sake as well, what do you consider is the role of a critic? Like, why do we have critics?
I can speak to what I would like the role of a critic to be in the future, which I have talked on a South by Southwest panel this past March. And I mean, into the future, I would love it if the role of the critic were more of a curator, and instead of just like constantly trying to chase the wave of hype of whatever artist is coming out with a new record, where instead helping people to dig through the tens of thousands of albums that are coming out every year and just sort of saying what's worthwhile and what isn't. I personally, I don't find any real gratification or any real interest in like reviewing a Katy Perry record. Not that Katy Perry's music is bad, not that she's not talented or not that she's not worthwhile. I actually find, her to be way less gimmicky than somebody like Lady Gaga, for example, which, in a respect I find refreshing. Taylor Swift as well. I find her to be pretty no BS, even though her music doesn't really appeal to me personally. But to me, those artists are so popular that, what would I be like really enlightening anybody about if I were to be reviewing Katy Perry? I don't think like my opinion is such fucking gold that I can just comment on something that everybody and their mother has heard about. And just be like, well, there you go. And just like shove it down everybody's throats, unless it's like something that people are really just fucking begging me to review, there are things that, I choose to review because my audience really sort of demands it. And, and it's sort of the give and take of the whole thing. There are artists that I review that nobody's asking about because people haven't fucking heard of who they are. And there are artists that they ask for that simultaneously I was planning on reviewing already. It's a bit of a Venn diagram sort of thing. Yeah. There are artists that fall into both of those spheres and in between. But there are some artists that I'd much rather not review because I'd much rather review something, even if I think it's just as good, or even if I think it's maybe a little bit worse, something more underground, just so that maybe somebody can come along and maybe hear about it here for the first time. And then maybe that sort of, catapults them into listening to another artist or another genre that they wouldn't have done otherwise. I'm sort of like really obsessed and really interested in sort of the change that music can make in somebody's life, and sort of, the change that it had in my life when I first got exposed to that particular artist or a certain artist, and, sort of the rabbit hole that can send you down. And I kind of want to be that person that just like, whether you're like expecting it or not, just fucking shove you down that rabbit hole.
Exactly. It's
really, like really violently.
Exactly. Just as hard as you can. Just like your friend exposed you to music when you were younger. Like, everybody already loves Rage Against the Machine. What's the point? But then, bam, you've got this artist that you've never heard of, and now your mind's been open. That's essentially what you're trying to do. You're not trying to stay what everybody already knows. You're trying to open up minds a little bit.
Yeah, most definitely. And the thing is, not that I'm against popular artists in theory. I mean, I think that, popular music has a place and a time, and a lot of my favorite music of last year was pretty popular. I mean, I love that new Daft Punk record, for example. I did come to realize over the evolution of the YouTube channel that, it's sort of essential to review at least some of this stuff, because when I first had started, I convinced myself that I'm only going to review obscure stuff that nobody ever knows about. But, like there came a point when somebody was like, hey man, can you review the new MGMT track or something? Like, this is like when Congratulations was about to come out.
Yeah.
Personally, I liked MGMT, even though it wasn't like really in what I perceived to be like the mission statement of the channel, you know what I mean? But personally, I liked MGMT. So, there was a part of me that was like, well, I mean, if I really like it, maybe it's also my job to just talk about stuff that I like, whether it's popular or not.
There you go.
So then when I reviewed MGMT, I realized that, whoa, that brought me a whole ton of traffic. People who are now watching my videos for more obscure bands, and now they're hearing about those groups. And then it was like, oh, okay. So like, if I only review these obscure groups, the way that people find out about these groups, it's kind of like they're only finding out about me if they punch those obscure groups in, and that means they pretty much have already heard of them. But if I'm reviewing more popular stuff and bringing in people who haven't heard of these obscure groups, and then they check them out through my subscription feed, that's really what the point of turning someone on is.
Yeah, there's a balance there for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a, like you just said, it's a bit of a balance.
All right, Anthony, thank you for joining us today. Where can all of our listeners find you?
YouTube.com/The Needle Drop, Twitter.com/The Needle Drop, Facebook.com/The Needle Drop, TheNeedleDrop.com, Tumblr, Needle Drop, Instagram, Fantano, and I think that's it.
Wow, that's awesome.
You really putting yourself out there. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Anthony's such a cool guy. You can follow myself on Twitter at Sean Chin.
And myself, not nearly at as many sites, at Andreas Babs on Twitter.
You can follow the show at Live in Limbo and use the hashtag Capsule Podcast to join in on the conversation. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes. And as always, you can find the show notes at liveinlimbo.com/capsule. Take care.
Have a good one.